Welcome to Unchained, the radio program which addresses the challenges facing Christians today with short, pithy presentations presenting a vigorous defense for Christianity's claim that the Holy Bible is God's inspired word. This series deconstructs the arguments of evolutionists, anti-theists, atheists, and other enemies of the Holy Bible. Here is your host, Pastor Rod Anderson.
Hi, I'm Rod Anderson. When you are debating a person who claims to have a thirst for knowledge and only wants to present the truth, you would rightly imagine that that same person would make sure of their facts. But this is not the case with many high-profile atheists who intentionally omit facts, reinterpret data, and just tell lies. Let me give you some examples. Professor Richard Dawkins, in his book The God Delusion, stated that there is no historical evidence for Jesus Christ. But when he was pressed in a debate with Professor John Lennox, this is what he said.
Yeah, well, but you know, that disturbs me for the following reason. Reading your book, The God Delusion, you say that it's under scholarly dispute among historians that Jesus actually existed. Now, I checked with the ancient historians. That is not so. And it disturbed me. History is not natural science. But what I don't understand is this, why you would write something like that.
I don't think it's a very important question whether Jesus existed. There are some historians, most historians think he did, some
They certainly
don't.
do. I couldn't find an ancient historian that didn't.
Well, there are one or two, but I don't really care, actually, because precisely because it's petty. I mean, you need to know whether it's true.
Yes.
Now, when you look at history, and let's leave aside, maybe I alluded to the possibility that some historians think Jesus never existed. I take that back. Jesus existed. However,
despite the retraction or recanting of his earlier position, his website at the time of this recording had not been updated and still presents the original lie found in the God Delusion that historians say that Jesus did not exist. That is just plain dishonest. Now, in the book by the late Christopher Hitchens, God is Not Great, he reveals a strategy that he and his evolutionist allies use in debating with Christians. And I want to quote from page 256 of the self-same book. The dogmatic faithful can easily be outpointed and satirized by one who pretends to take their preachings at face value. And having heard Christopher Hitchens, he means taking the biblical teachings to the extreme end of the spectrum and represent them to appear silly or fanciful. Now, Daniel Dennett, who with Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris claimed the title Brides, has admitted that he is prepared to hide material that has caused him to stop and think and even to reassess his position. Notice this.
I'm absolutely riveted by what you say. I really love an instance in theory or practice of something you think we could know but could forbid ourselves to know. Because that is harder for me to imagine a world without faith.
Well, you brought up the bell curve. I mean, if there
Yes.
were reliable differences in intelligences between races
Yes.
or species,
but I don't think any of us here
genders.
do think that that's the case. I mean, I think there must be something, you must have thought of something you could believe but wish you didn't know.
Oh, I don't think it's hard to dream up things which, if they were true, it might be better for the human race to go on not knowing them.
But could you concretize it just a little more?
Yeah.
I'm completely...
I mean, the hypothetical is one thing, but Christopher's asking, do you actually... Have you ever suppressed something?
No, I haven't.
No.
Can you imagine yourself doing so, by the way? I mean, I can't.
Oh, I can imagine it. I hope it never comes up.
Daniel Dennett admits if he knew something was true, he would suppress it. What does that say for his honesty regarding the evidence for God or the weakness in the evolutionary theory? In other words, there are no limits that some, not all, but some high-profile evolutionary atheists will go to in order to sell their books, increase the value of their appearance monies, and to strut the big stage. There are times when atheists in the public square have challenged Christians to identify any period in history when an atheistic nation impoverished and brutalized its citizenry and led the country to ruin. Of course, any person who has any knowledge of the 20th century immediately cites the 60 million souls murdered by Joseph Stalin, the head of that atheistic superpower, the Soviet Union. In Russia itself, because of the horrendous persecution, thousands of churches were bulldozed and blown up. In 1927, it was estimated that there were 30,000 churches. By 1940, there were less than 500, and the only reasons why they survived was because Stalin attempted to ingratiate himself to the remnants of the Russian Orthodox Church and raise the morale against the common foe, against the Nazi invaders of World War II. We only have to think about Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich, who believed the exterminations of millions of Jews, Gypsies and others was their Darwinian right, based on the doctrine of Aryan supremacy and the writings of the atheistic philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. In Germany, it became law that any person of non-Aryan race were forbidden to marry people of German extraction. Furthermore, there was a program of systematic murder of the physically handicapped, along with the mentally handicapped patients in psychiatric hospitals, which took place during the 1930s and the 1940s. Under the provisions of this law, or a law promulgated on the 14th of July 1933, the Nazi regime carried out the compulsory sterilisation of over 400,000 individuals labelled as having hereditary defects. These atrocities were the fruits of Darwinian belief that had spread like a plague through the German universities in the late 1800s and were espoused by the nation's thinkers and philosophers. However, let us not forget it was the terrible conditions which the Allies had left Germany in after World War I, overwhelmed with war reparations, loss of territory and national identity, which became the fertile soil, the fertile ground for Hitler's ascension, which allowed this dehumanization to flourish. It is said that time heals all wounds, and we forget. But this is why we should not forget history, and we will make the mistakes of the future we will make the same mistakes of the past if we forget what history actually teaches us. For example, let's go back to Cambodia and the atheistic regime of the Khmer Rouge led by Pol Pot in the 1970s. Pol Pot presided over a totalitarian dictatorship in Cambodia, which he renamed the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea, in which his government made urban dwellers move to the countryside to work in collective farms and on forced labour projects. The combined effects of execution, strenuous working conditions, malnutrition and poor medical care caused the death of approximately 25% of the Cambodian population. Nearly 3 million people died to this policy of this 4-year atheistic policy as Premier of Cambodia. Going back further and study the French Revolution of the late 1800s. Yes, it was certainly a violent reaction against the hundreds of years of abuses inflicted by the Roman Catholic Church upon French society, famine among the peasants, and the unrestrained wealth of the clergy and the aristocracy, and the indifference of the French royal family. But discover what happened when the nation rejected God as the French National Assembly legislated God and the Bible from French society. Go back and investigate the consequences of France when mobs were given freedom to destroy churches and the religious imagery associated with them. When the nation paraded the goddess of reason through the streets of Paris to be worshipped and adored, while the Bibles were gathered and thrown upon pies and burnt in public squares. Discover what happened when the French jettisoned the 7-day week, which comes from the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, and changed to a 10-day weekly cycle, which was celebrated as a grand festival throughout the land, and what it led to. Investigate and you will find how France impoverished itself, farmlands were abandoned, the educated fled, and mass executions were the result of it. If you study in depth, you will see what happens when a nation publicly rejects God, and what happens was France was left in ruins and opened the way for the French dictator Napoleon to lead the people and the country into a calamitous war, ending with ignominious defeat. Atheists want us to believe that Christianity retards the development and advancement of humanity in the arts, science, morality and philosophy. But if their propaganda was embraced today by Western society, it would eventually see us fall to the depths plumbed during the reign of terror in the French Revolution. Oh yes, evolutionary atheists claiming the title of brights are willing to rewrite history, misinterpret modern science, intentionally lie and mislead people for their own ends. But I want you to be sure, and I want you to be confident, and I want you to be aware of their lies. And to that end, I want you to know the truth. So I'm happy to offer you a free set of 25 Bible reading guides entitled The Orchard Faith of Jesus Studies. They are easy to use and will be a wonderful blessing to you. And all you have to do to receive them is send me an email with your name, postal address and phone number to info@theorchardmelbourne.org.au. That is info@theorchardmelbourne.org.au, or go to our website, theorchardmelbourne.org.au, and go to the tab marked Contact Us, follow the prompts, and we will send the Bible studies out to you wherever you are. Well, our time has run out for now. My name's Rod Anderson. Remember, the truth has nothing to fear from investigation. I look forward to being with you next time. Goodbye for now.
You have been listening to Unchained. We look forward to your company here next time on 3ABN Australia Radio as we continue this series with Pastor Rod Anderson. Coming up next, the Shelton Trio with the song I Find No Fault.
I find no fault in Him. I find no fault in Him. Yet He was rejected, despised of men, but I find no fault in Him. They led Christ to Calvary, but He never said one word, just the Christ of lost sinners was all the Savior heard. And when they pierced Him in His side, and His blood came streaming down, and that's how He purchased my salvation.